Once upon a time, in a distant large city, there were two small children. They were friends but loved each other like siblings. The boy's name was Kay, and the girl's name was Gerda. They always played together and never separated. Gerda also had a grandmother. Her grandmother knew many stories and would tell them at the right time. One day, while Kay and Gerda were playing, the grandmother called them over and said, "Children, I have a new story for you today. If you want, come and I'll tell it." The children ran to their grandmother and started listening to the story attentively. The grandmother told them the story of the Snow Queen, famous for her white covering that blankets everything in winter. The children listened to the story their grandmother told and then went to sleep. The next day, everything was covered in snow. The children ran outside and started sledding. At that moment, they saw a huge sleigh passing by. The sleigh was being pulled by a dozen white reindeer. The children immediately followed this large sleigh. After sledding for a while, most of the children let go of the sleigh and returned. Only Kay didn't let go of the sleigh. In the meantime, he didn't realize that he had gotten quite far from the city. Eventually, the sleigh stopped by itself. And who should step out of the sleigh but the Snow Queen, wrapped in her white cloak? Kay realized that this was the queen he had heard about in his grandmother's story. The Snow Queen said to Kay, "You must be very cold. Come sit with me." Kay sat beside the Snow Queen and wrapped himself in the cloak she gave him. Suddenly, he stopped feeling cold. The Snow Queen, with the child who had fallen asleep beside her, took him to her palace. It turned out that the Snow Queen would take the children she captured to her palace and cover them in ice. She turned Kay into a little ice statue in this way. In the city, Gerda, who hadn't heard from Kay for a long time, set out to look for her friend. She walked into the snow-covered forest. While searching for her friend in the forest, she came across a small hut. When she approached the hut, an old woman opened the door. This woman was a sorceress known for her good deeds in those parts. She said to the girl, "I know why you are here, my dear. You are looking for your friend Kay. Let's see if the crow in the garden knows where he is." She took Gerda to the back garden. There was indeed a crow waiting on a branch. They asked the crow where Kay was. The crow said, "Only the little girl living in the forest knows where Kay is." With that, Gerda asked the old woman for permission and continued on her way. As she wandered through the depths of the forest, she saw a tiny, very beautiful hut. The door of the hut opened. The little girl the crow had mentioned came out. She said to Gerda, "Welcome, I was expecting you." She took Gerda inside and sat her by the fire. She gave her some food she had brought. Later, they slept together. In the morning, the little girl took Gerda to the barn next to the hut. Inside, there were pigeons and reindeer. The pigeons started to coo. The little girl understood the pigeons' language. She explained to Gerda what the pigeons were saying. The pigeons say that the Snow Queen has captured Kay, imprisoned him in her palace, and the reindeer know how to get there. With that, they prepared to set off. They harnessed the reindeer to the sleigh. Gerda thanked the little girl for helping her. They waved goodbye to each other. Gerda set off with the sleigh pulled by the reindeer. They traveled for days. They reached the northernmost tip of the world, where nothing could be seen but a blanket of white snow. It was constantly snowing heavily. After traveling for a while longer, they stopped in front of a white palace. Gerda realized that they had arrived at the Snow Queen's palace. She went inside. The inside of the palace was as white as the outside. Gerda started walking inside the palace, calling out for Kay. There was no sound in the palace except for the echo of her own voice. Gerda saw a door made of ice. She opened the door and looked inside. In the middle of the room, she found Kay frozen. He looked like a little ice statue. Gerda, thinking that Kay was dead, started crying. She cried so much that her tears began to fall to the ground. At that moment, a miracle happened. The tears from Gerda's eyes began to melt the frozen Kay. As the ice covering him melted, Kay began to wake up and speak. Gerda, I am so happy to see you. Gerda was also very happy that Kay was not dead. Kay said that the Snow Queen had left the palace but could return at any moment. They quickly left the palace and got on the sleigh pulled by the reindeer. They left the northern country and returned home. Both of them could not forget this exciting adventure they had experienced. They decided not to wander too far from home anymore and only to listen to their grandmother's stories.